Chapter 13 of Colonel Quaritch, V.C. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Colonel Quaritch, V.C. by H. Rider Haggart. Chapter 13. About Art. Edward Cossey drove from the castle in a far from happy frame of mind. To begin with, the squire and his condescending way of doing business irritated him very much, so much that once or twice in the course of the conversation he was within an ace of breaking the whole thing off, and only restrained himself with difficulty from so doing. As it was, notwithstanding all the sacrifices and money risks which he was undergoing to take up these mortgages, and they were very considerable even to a man of his great prospects, he felt that he had been placed in the position of a person who receives a favour rather than of a person who grants one. Moreover, there was an assumption of superiority about the old man, a visible recognition of the gulf which used to be fixed between the gentleman of family and the man of business who had grown rich by trading in money and money's worth, which was the more galling because it was founded on actual fact, and Edward Cossey knew it. All his foibles and oddities notwithstanding, it would have been impossible for any man of discernment to entertain a comparison between the half-bankrupt squire and the young banker, who would shortly be worth between £500,000 and £1,000,000 sterling. The former was a representative, though a somewhat erratic one, of all that is best in the old type of Englishman of gentle blood, which is now so rapidly vanishing, and indeed of the class to which a very large extent this country owes her greatness. His very eccentricities were wandering lights which showed unsuspected heights and depths in his character: love of country and his country's honour, respect for the religion of his fathers, loyalty of mind and valour for the right. Had he lived in other times, probably, like some of the old Boiseys who were at Honham before him, he would have died in the Crusades, or at Cressy, or perhaps more uselessly for his king at Marston Moor, or like that last but one of the true de la Molles, kneeling in the courtyard of his castle and defying his enemies to wring his secret from him. Now no such opportunities were left to men of his stamp, and they are, perhaps as a consequence, dying out of an age which is unsuited to them, and indeed to most strong growths of individual character. In fact, it would be much easier to deal with a gentleman like the squire of this history, if only we could reach down one of those old suits of armour from the walls of his vestibule and put it on his back, and take that long two-handled sword, which last flashed on the Flodden field, from its resting place beneath the clock, and at the end see him die as a loyal knight should do, in the forefront of his retainers, with the old war cry of "A de la Mole, a de la Mole" upon his lips. As it is, he is an aristocratic anachronism, an entity unfitted to deal with the elements of our advanced and in some ways emasculated age. His body should have been where his heart was, in the past. What chance have such as he against the quests of this polite era of political economy and bimetallism? No wonder that Edward Cossey felt his inferiority to this symbol and type of the thing that no more are, yes, even in the shadow of his £30,000. For here we have a different breed. Goldsmiths 2 centuries ago, then bankers from generation to generation, money bees seeking for wealth and counting it and hiving it from decade to decade, till at last money became to them what honour is to the nobler stock, the pervading principle, and the clink of the guinea and the rustling of the banknote stirred their blood as the clang of armed men and the sound of the flapping banner, with its 3 golden hawks flaming in the sun, was wont to set the hearts of the race of Boise, of d'Offerleigh, and of de la Mole beating to that tune to which England marched on to win the world. It is a foolish and vain thing to scoff at business and those who do it in the marketplaces, and to shout out the old war cries of our fathers in the face of a generation which sings the song of capital, or groans in heavy labour beneath the banners of their copyrighted trademarks. And besides, who would buy our books, also copyrighted except in America, if we did? Let us rise up and clothe ourselves and put a tall hat upon our heads and greet the new democracy with a big D. And yet, in the depth of our hearts and the quiet of our chambers, after the gas is turned down and the ladies have gone to bed, let us sometimes cry to the old times and the old men and the old ways of thought. Let us cry, Ave atque vel, hail and farewell. Our fathers' armour hangs upon the door, their portraits, whatever else they may be, we now know are not art, decorate the wall, and their fierce and half-tamed hearts moulder beneath the stones of yonder church. Hail and farewell to our fathers. Perchance a man might have had worse company than he met with at your boards, and even have found it not more hard to die beneath your sword cuts, fighting for some cause which to you at any rate appeared to be good and grand, than to be gently cozened to the grave by duly qualified practitioners at 2 guineas a visit. And the upshot of all this is that the Squire was not altogether wrong when he declared in the silence of his chamber that Edward Cossey was not quite a gentleman. He showed it when he allowed himself to be guided by the arts of Mr. Quest into the adoption of the idea of obtaining a lien upon Ida, to be enforced if convenient. He showed it again, and what is more, he committed a huge mistake when, tempted thereto by the opportunity of the moment, he made a conditional bargain with the said Ida, whereby she was placed in pledge for the sum of £30,000, well knowing that her honour would be equal to the test, and that if convenient to him she would be ready to pay the debt. I say he made a huge mistake, for had he been quite a gentleman he would have known that he could not have adopted a worse road to the affections of a lady. Had he been content to advance the money, and then by and by, though even that would not have been gentlemanlike, have gently let it transpire that what he had done had been at a great personal expense and inconvenience, her imagination might have been touched, and her gratitude would surely have been excited. But the idea of bargaining, the idea of purchase, which after what had passed could never be put aside, would of necessity be fatal to any hope of tender feeling. Shylock might get his bond, but of his own act he had debarred himself from the possibility of ever getting more. Now Edward Cossey was not lacking in that afterglow of refinement which is left behind by a course of public school and university education. No education can make a gentleman of a man who is not a gentleman at heart, for whether his station in life be that of a ploughboy or an earl, the gentleman, like the poet, is born and not made. But it can and does, if he be of an observant nature, give him a certain insight into the habits of thought and probable course of action of the members of that class to which he outwardly and by repute belongs. Such an insight Edward Cossey possessed, and at the very present moment its possession was troubling him very much. His trading instincts, the desire bred in him to get something for his money, had led him to make the bargain. But now that it was done, his better judgment rose up against it. For the truth may as well be told at once, although he would as yet scarcely acknowledge it to himself. Edward Cossey was already violently enamoured of Ida. He was by nature a passionate man, and as it chanced, she had proved the magnet with power to draw his passion. But as the reader is aware, there existed another complication in his life, for which he was not perhaps entirely responsible. When still quite a youth in mind, he had suddenly found himself the object of love of a beautiful and enthralling woman, and he had, after a more or less severe struggle, yielded to the temptation, as out of a book many young men would have done. Now to be the object of the violent affection of such a woman as Bella Quest is no doubt very flattering and even charming for a while. But if that affection is not returned in kind, if, in short, the gentleman does not love the lady quite as warmly as she loves him, then in course of time the charm is apt to vanish, and even the flattery to cease to please. Also, when, as in the present case, the connection is wrong in itself and universally condemned by society,